Hello and welcome to Nap Time. This is Season 2, Episode 3, and rather than looking at a particular tool today, I'm going to go back to looking at some of the specifics of flint knapping to try and help you improve your technique. In the last episode, I looked at Neolithic axes, and I talked a little bit about the background of axes, how to make it, but today, hopefully this episode will cover so many different parts of flint knapping that you'll be able to keep coming back to it and referring to it to hopefully improve your action, your technique and your understanding of the process. And this episode is all about platform management and maintenance and trying to improve your flaking once you get to the later stages on a biface. And there are so many different types of bifaces out there. It includes some of the earliest and the most recognizable, the hand axe, but all the way through to spearheads, knife blades, even right down to very small arrowheads, because they're all flaked on both sides. They're all bifacially flaked, and that's what I'm going to be making, that biface. I'm going to be starting with a very big piece of flint that's been quarried. I have right here, and it's quite an unusually awkwardly shaped piece of flint, as you can see, very heavy, and I'm going to look at how I can work through it. But importantly, I'm going to keep trying to focus on what those platforms look like, possibly making some intentional or accidental mistakes along the way, and how to undo them most importantly. So I'll begin working through this, and if I'm going to make my biface from this, I need to try and identify where it's going to come from. If you have an idea of what you'd like to make from the beginning, then that's great, but as I often say, to some extent you might be dictated by the flint. It might just be a piece of flint that is better for a core or blade core, but ideally for biface production it wants to be fairly flat, tabular flint, so something like this, which if I hold it up on the side, you can see it's pretty flat apart from some knobbly bits, but as you saw, I've got plenty to remove from the edges, but the biface bit, if I balance it on my leg, will possibly come from this bit here, that middle bit. So I've got all of these bits around the edge to remove, but I can use those to my advantage to set up platforms to put in some invasive flakes with a hammerstone, and that's exactly what I'm going to do to begin with. So let's see where to start. Where have I got major thicknesses? Well, if I turn it round here, just in front of me below my chin, I've got this thick bit here, and if I tilt it forward, you can see there's a bit of crushing on the surface here, probably where it was being knocked around in the quarry. If I can get a flake through and under there, then as well as thinning it down, it will hopefully remove any problems or even identify any problems quite early on, because if there's a big crack or a fossil of some kind in this, then it might not be suitable. So one of those big early flakes will hopefully identify that. But how to get into it and remove this? Well, if you've been watching some of the videos, you will hopefully start to have seen and understood by now that I can't just hit through it on the top of it, straight onto it. I would need to attack it from the other side. But if I do that, I could possibly hit it from this angle here and come through it and undercut it here, but it's quite a thick angle here, and actually you might notice, and I wonder if you can see it on this angle, so this angle here that I could try and hit through, it might be possible, but it would need an absolutely enormous strike to undercut that over 90-degree angle here, and it might remove more than I want. So instead of going through there, I could actually use one of these protrusions off the side here, because there's a bit of a lump, not quite a ridge, but a bulge that leads right into this middle bit I was looking at. If I was to strike it on the top here, and you shouldn't have to need to see too closely, if I was to strike on the top there, the plane of fracture would run through and probably terminate here, and that's simply because where the flake will try and curve, there is a limit, and it can't curve round the corner. But I can still use this to my advantage to take off a lot of material while removing it. So I'm actually going to flake on the other side first to set up that platform. You can hear not a bad ring to this, but flint can be a real liar. It can ring very nicely, but have all sorts of flaws in it, so I'm not relaxing just on that at the moment. If I strike it here, this will put a plane of fracture through it that I can then use to come back on myself. There we go. And there's that flake that's gone right underneath. And as you can see, it's curved slightly, but not gone much further. And it's a clean removal of a flake that could be used as a core straight away, so I'll save that. But now, when I flip it over, you can hopefully see that if I strike straight down on this edge now, probably about 2 to 3 centimetres depth into the edge, because I'm undercutting quite a lot of material, underneath there is a gentle curve that goes all the way. There aren't any concavities apart from this very small one here. And by quite aggressively abrading that edge, if I needed to, I can remove that concavity. I'm just grinding it back to a thicker area. So if by chance I caught the edge a bit too close, rather than hitting it at that 2 to 3 centimetres depth, it would still allow flake to travel and wouldn't be too damaging. But so hopefully on that scale now, you're a bit closer, you can see there is more of a gentle curve that gets right into the meat of that flint. So if I was to strike here with a hard hit, it should follow right through into that flake. You can see that because it was just a single flake and it was a clean flake, that it's a really nice flat, untouched platform. And really this is, I guess, one of the key things to look at is that imagine the strongest shape. And I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and hopefully those that are watching the live chat will be instantly typing square, and that would be incorrect, or circle, and that would also be incorrect. It is of course a triangle. But what's the strongest part of a triangle? Have a think. It's the points. It's those corners of the triangle that can withstand a huge amount of structure in rows. Configurations can be used to hold up huge amounts of weight and mass. But what are the weakest parts of the triangle? If you were to try and break a triangle, it'd be the sides, the faces that could break inwards. And that's exactly what I will utilise here. Rather than hitting one of these ridges that will be much stronger and distribute that shock either side of the ridge, I'm going to hit one of the flat faces. So something to bear in mind: if you've got any ridges on your platform, try and remove them. So with this very awkwardly shaped piece of flint that's very heavy, I'm now going to try and strike it on that fresh platform at that 2 to 3 centimetres depth and undercut that material. There is a chance this piece of flint might split, because although it has a nice ring to it, I can, by striking it in this way, induce end shock, which could cause it to snap. But we'll see. I'm hoping it won't. So there's the flake. It started to get into that middle patch and left me with a nice flake behind it. Very useful as a hand axe or a smaller biface. Blank. And with that flake removed, I've now got opportunities to come back on myself. But my next port of call, my next little side bit to remove would either be here or here, but not to attack it immediately. Still, I'm still going to set up that two-stage, two-punch approach. So I'm going to do exactly the same. Tilt my flint on that nice clean platform. Take a flake off. Nice scraper blank. And now I'm going to try on the other side. Make sure the angle's looking good. There is a slight concavity there, but I'm hoping that I can undercut it if I hit adjacent to it where it isn't concaved. There we go. And now it's really got into the meat of that crushed area, and another good hand axe blank. And much lighter because of it. So that's that area cleaned off, and it's actually sounding even better now. A real ring to it. So I've utilised those protrusions, the knobbles, if you like, to help me in the process. I'm not just hitting to remove them just because they're in the way. I'm going to try and use as much of that material as I can. So what are my next problems? Where's the next thing I should perhaps try and remove? And nowhere near as severe, but perhaps this patch off the back here. Now, in some cases, I might have one of those naturally tilting platforms that either might be where the flint broke in the quarry, where it has here, or just to use the cortex, because in some cases you might just have to hit through the cortex, and because that cortex, that contact point between the flint and the chalk, will have a slightly spongy texture to it in comparison to the very hard glassy flint, you might just have to hit a little bit harder. So let's see if this is a viable hit. Clearly I've got a lot of this mass on the back here that I'm going to try and remove, but I don't think it's worth going for it just yet. And the reason is that the platform on this other side, if I was to strike through it now, the flake would probably terminate about here and wouldn't really get into the meat of that material. So if I utilise this edge to remove some of this problem first, then by pushing that edge a bit closer to that next step, it'll be easier, and I'll hopefully have a better platform to work off. My angle here that I was thinking about going for next, I think that is pretty much 90 degrees. It's a very risky one to go for, and I'm not going to go for it. The other reason is that as I turn it round, and hopefully you can see it, unlike this edge here that's pretty flat and clean but has a big concavity behind it, so no good, it's nowhere near as clean here. It's got a fair bit of damage on the edge. It's certainly not viable to go for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over and flake through here just to tilt the angle slightly and remove any of those problems. Oh, you don't need a gym membership doing this, I can tell you. So this edge, to clean up that platform and remove it, it's under 90 degrees, and that will be striking through the cortex, but it's a fairly flat platform, so should be reasonably safe to hit. There we go. Not a hard hit, and that's taken off that fairly nasty looking edge. So now as I come back to remove this material here, I've got a clean platform, it's well under 90 degrees, and as I hit it, it should come through and remove that with ease. And in fact, I'm going to slightly abrade it just to remove that very thin area here. You hear that lovely ring sound to it. You can see now I've been quite aggressive with that abrasion there, actually removed some sizable flakes. There are a few ridges and crushed areas near the bottom, and if I was going to hit close to the edge or with an antler hammer, that could be a problem, but I'm not at this stage, so it's not a bother. There we go, there's that lump, that removal I mentioned, now gone. It's left me a nice surface on here, and a potential platform to attack some more of this. But hopefully you can see the potential problem here, that if I strike through here, it'll terminate about here. There just isn't the mass. So how to undo that? Well, then you should hopefully be working out that problem for me. I need to attack it from here to tilt that angle. If I hold it up, you can see perhaps there's a slight concavity here. Just have to be aware of that and check as I go. I think I might tilt that angle a tiny bit more. Nice clean flake there. And I think it should be okay. I don't want to tilt it too much more. There we go. Another useful blank. And this is certainly one way that very large pieces of flint were dealt with in the Neolithic to make cores. If you went to the World of Stonehenge exhibition, you will have seen the giant flint core that was found near West Kennet, and quite a few others have been found elsewhere. And this is exactly how they were attacking it. It was creating these cores around the edge of the outside, big invasive flakes with a hard hammer that they could then retouch into all sorts of tools. Still got these two knobbles on the outside, not too much of a problem at the moment. I have got on this edge these two corner bits that stick out towards you. They're pointing downwards at the moment, and actually I'd probably want to remove this material underneath just to make them appear a bit flatter. And I've got this big thick mass on the top that needs some big flakes removing. But I've still got these two extremities on the end here, and again I'm not just going to hit them off just to hit them off. I'm going to use them as opportunities to take off big flakes. And from this edge here there is naturally a slightly tilting platform. There is a bit of a bump to it, but it's fairly clean around the area I'd strike to send a reasonable size flake across the back. What I'm just looking for is to see if that's the best flake to detach next. And the reason why I say that is because if I hold it on this side, if I take the flake off here, it'll probably travel across and terminate around here, because it will get to this slight bump here and probably stop. But if I take a flake off here prior to that, and actually drop this area slightly, which I would do at some point anyway, then that flake might travel a bit further, or vice versa. I've got to make that decision at some point. And it might just be a case of one flake could be slightly better than the other. And I'm tempted to go for this first and just reduce its size slightly, because I think I'll get a better flake from here that would be useful for another workshop flake. And I say that because this area here is quite narrow. Even if I hit it in the most optimal setting, it would remain narrow and then splay out, which could be useful, but this is fairly wide at this end and it'll only get a little bit wider, so there's a lot more opportunity in this side. I've still got to hit it correctly and accurately, but I'll deal with this area first. A big flake isn't needed, certainly in comparison to what I've just taken off. And there we go, remained narrow, still pretty useful, but not a very big useful blank. And now you can see if I attack it from here, there is a slight flat area in the middle, but it then starts to drop down. So what I'm going to do is set up a platform to go through here, and I can't at the moment because there's this opposing platform here. I could strike further back, but it'd be quite short. So I'm going to utilise this platform that's nice and flat to take a flake off the side here. Plane of fracture runs through there, and then it'll be tilted, ready to come back. So I'm actually, instead of just hitting it on top to take a platform off the other side, I'm striking it at the side. Again, a small flake, struck it at the side, you can see that impact point, off comes the flake. Has created a little hinge on this side, but it's not a problem. Be fairly easy to deal with. Just use a smaller hammerstone just to change that angle a little more. I don't need a big hit. This is just platform maintenance. So those flakes look fairly clean. I could even make that a touch steeper, just a tiny bit. What I've got to be careful not to do is keep flaking this edge until it's 90 degrees, because otherwise, as you know, it won't flake. But it is about, must be close to 80 degrees now, so I'm at my limit. I've got a couple of little ridges on there, so I'm just going to detach them. Some aggressive abrasion, just to knock them off. Very small flakes. Now keep checking, importantly. I think that'll do. One big hit, hopefully a nice big blank that, again, if I can hit it correctly, will prove my strategy right about taking off that narrow flake to allow this flake to be larger and wider. Possibly hear that it has gone. Aha, there we go, end shock. Thought something had changed in sound. You can see, despite it ringing nicely, look at that fault that's in there, and it's on one of those knobbles on the end that have now flown off conveniently. So that shock went straight through and pushed the other end out. So I'll go back to hitting where I was. There we go. Big nice flake to use a bit later. I'm now going to take another flake, doing the same action, that two-stage approach. Flake. This is now starting to get thinner and thankfully lighter. I think I'm going to explore this area that's pinged off just to prove to myself there are no problems in it. So for this area that detached from that end shock, we've got a lot of this fossil material. There's a bit of a burrow in here. There's some oil staining just under here that's quite common in this flint. And a couple of little flaws that hopefully don't run through too far into the flint. Now this is right at the edge that I can see at the moment. Hopefully it doesn't go too much further into the flint. But from here I have the opportunity to put in a strike here and maybe lose some of this material here, and hopefully something on the other side too. Now if this mass was right in the middle, this could cause major problems, certainly for something like an axe head that doesn't need any shock or faults going through material like this. But as it's at the edge, hopefully not too much of a problem. Let's see if I've got any other opportunities. Oh, there might be one to attack it from here, and it's because that edge is just under 90 degrees, but that area of cortex is quite flat for me to drive a flake through just to clean it out and just to see if it is worse than it actually looks. So you notice how I'm tilting it up to keep that platform nice and flat, just to make my life easier, and thankfully it doesn't go very deep at all, not a problem. There's a bit more of a flaw there that looks to be just surface. I've got a slight concavity here, you can probably see there. And if I put a flake through here, that'll just take away that concavity for a later flake. There we go, nowhere near as bad now. And I think to either remove or expose this possible flaw a bit more, I might set up a flake to go through here, remove some of this mass. You can see the flaw we've got here, a bit of iron staining in there, some crystals, probably quartz, but that flaw that appears to run in this direction. Now the flint still sounds okay, so hopefully it won't run too much further, but I'm going to try and strike through here and see what it does, just to test it. So you can hear that sound change again. It has detached, but I think, or I hope it's just a flake. There we go. There's that flake, that very hard break. You can see where the floor is running through there, that purpley surface. So I've got the floor that you can see running through here. Hopefully it doesn't continue through the flint much more, otherwise that is going to be a problem. So again, to keep exploring this floor, and the reason why I'm exploring it is because I definitely wouldn't want to leave it until I'm much further down the line. If it's going to crack and break, better to do it early on. I'm going to put a flake through here. Let's try and set up a flake to come back on myself through it as normal. But if it snaps or it becomes worse, at least I'll know. I could take a flake through here now, but there is a slight concavity here and it wouldn't be a very big flake. So I'm going to change that angle. And the flake fragmented, and I think that's because it ran up to the floor and stopped. So a little more exploration to do. Still see it running across there, but it hasn't given anything away yet. So I'm going to take a bit more of this edge off to remove the extreme end of that concavity, and then go at it with a hard flake through here. There is a chance it will snap in half now, because I'm really almost forcing it to try and show its hand. But again, if it goes, it will perhaps save me sadness later down the line. Still hasn't gone. Okay, so that's exposed more of that floor. So you can really see that floor running through this piece of flint now. So for all of it ringing at the start, I did say flint can lie. So I'm going to continue because it's not in two pieces yet. And if it does break, hopefully I'll still have plenty down this end to work with. Right over the back of that floor was where I took an earlier flake out. I didn't know about the floor at the time. It still doesn't sound as if it's about to go, but that may change with the next flake. I've really got to think quite carefully about what I want to do now, because I could stick with the original strategy of just taking these edges off and making this biface from the middle quite thin. That might be the extent of the floor, might not be anywhere near as bad as it could be, but do I mitigate the risk and only work on this area here that's inside of that edge? It's a tough call, but what I'm going to do is try and do a bit of both. I'm going to try a flake through here and undercut that hinge fracture there. If it does go, then nothing lost. So I've created that tilting angle that's nice and clean to come back on myself, to come through here and undercut it. I wonder if it's about to snap. No, still not. But that's nicely undercut that hinge. And this is a good example of where you can have these surface problems, like this quite deep hinge here, but because I set up a clean platform, as you can see from that nice clean platform on this flake, hammerstones are great for undercutting. You just have to make sure the platform is clean and you strike it at the right depth to undercut those problems. That's where a soft hammer would not be as good, because those soft hammer flakes, a bit like a pressure flaker, the flakes travel at the surface, so that's where a surface feature would be more problematic. So I've still got this floor that's hanging on for dear life. I'm not sure whether it's, or even if it is at all going to go, but I'm going to keep encouraging it to think about going. So my next flake will come along this ridge here. I'm going to use this to help direct the shock, but it is pretty flat at the moment. It would probably try and terminate here, so I'm just going to drop this edge a tiny bit so that curve comes back. And there you can see it's got a nicer curve to it. I might just knock off that corner bit to help set up that platform as well. This appears to be going back to an axe head, but I guess that's still a biface and biface manufacture. Let's see what this does, if it is going to break. Nope, still not going, but even with this flake it has some of that floor running through it. So I'm going to now set up a platform to come back, and with this platform here it needs to be tilted downwards because it's pretty flat. Nice easy setup, just aggressive abrasion. And at this stage in platform prep it's pretty straightforward. I haven't really gone into anything too difficult at this stage, but if we do indeed manage to get to the soft hammer stage, if this piece of flint holds together, that's where it will really start to become more important, because remember, as I just said, your soft hammer strikes will travel at the surface, whereas with a hammerstone you can just undercut problems. So I'm now going to go for a big flake across here and see if that floor is going to indeed go. No, a very big hit, gone right through it. See the floor there, still hasn't gone. Really thought it might then. So still got this floor here, the remains of it. But the fact it's holding on suggests it might have some structural integrity to it. So I've now got all of that thickness on this side, and as I attack it through here, that may be where that floor does break off, but we'll see. It's hung on so far. So to remove this patch here, I can't quite attack it straight away from here. I need to tilt that platform up as usual, and that will help by removing the end of this concavity when I start working on the other face. At least if this does make a smaller biface, or perhaps no biface at all, I do have a nice large pile of useful flakes. And as I said at the start, your game plan might change. So this is an example of a platform that's not quite so clean. I detached them, or these small flakes, with that hammerstone, and I'm left with a bit of a crushed edge, some ridges here, a little high point there, lots of tops of triangles, hard areas to try and hit. So I need to really, to give myself the best chance, remove this. So to undercut all of this would hopefully give me a nice clean edge underneath it. So I'll see if I can clean up that platform. There we go, much cleaner. There is still a good bit of ring in there, despite that flaw. It's a much thinner flake there. Just allows me to hopefully have a better follow-up. I'm still checking very frequently to keep an eye on the quality of those platforms. I'll go for a slightly heavier hammer that's buried under my flakes. If I go for a hard hammer, hopefully a big useful flake. There we go, big useful flake. Importantly, it's thinning out. I've still got this opposing platform here, which is a common problem, but actually very easy to deal with. Rather than hitting straight through it, I've got these two platforms either side to go through and take off flakes underneath and then come back on myself. Pretty straightforward to deal with. Don't even need a large hammerstone. I can probably even hold it in front of you and try and do this. This is not my natural position, just so you can see. So there's that first flake. Try and even do it left-handed now, which is very unnatural. So there's some of it gone, a bit more, a little more. So this probably looks really weird, me doing it in my left hand, but it's so that you can see it disappearing. It's almost there. I've almost got a clean flake through, and there we go. Maybe one more, just to clean it out. Much easier with the right hand. So that's now gone from that side. I can now come back on myself. In a far more natural pose and get rid of it. There we go. So I've still got this high patch here, so a flake through here. We struck on either one of the sides to come back on myself. As you can see now, this is lovely and light. If I was to hit it through here, I'll just get a short flake. So there's that flake to tilt and drop that angle. I wonder if I do it a little bit more. Might be okay actually. And that's really dropped that area. As I said earlier, this is turning into an axe head quite quickly, or a rough out. I've got a little bit of material to remove off the back here. Bit of a gentle curve there. So although I've got this tilting platform here, I think the angle is a little too acute. It won't allow a flake to travel, and it's very thin at the edge, so I'm going to slightly curve it a bit more just so it's not so flat, and then I'm going to change that angle exactly as I've been doing with many of the other flakes. Still just checking it to make sure there are no crushed bits, and if they are, or there are rather, I'll undercut them. Just a very small flake. That's the small flake. Now the angle is a little more towards being obtuse, but not over 90 degrees. And that platform, apart from a couple of little steps and problems and ridges, it's mostly clean. It's at an acceptable level. Okay. Followed that ridge quite far. Shame it snapped, but that is a lot of force for a flake like that to withstand. And it's run straight along the ridge. Almost got to that little hinge there, but that's not really what I was aiming for to remove. A bit like my axe video, it's not far away from its rough out stage. This face is okay, apart from this potential horror in the corner. Set up a platform to come back and utilise that ridge this time. So again, steep platform, because if I attack it here, as well as having a ridge, it just won't travel very far. It isn't pointing inwards into the meat of the flint. Whereas now it's looking a bit steeper, although there is a little ridge on that platform. With that thin flake removed, it's much flatter, much cleaner platform. More of that aggressive edge abrasion. And then on the reverse, this probably won't be as long a flake as the one before, although not far off. So, I've still got some height to remove from here. How best to approach it, the most efficient way to approach it is going to be interesting. I wonder if I'm pretty much just at soft hammer removal. I think I might be. So to get it to that biface rough out stage, I'm going to take a few heavy antler soft hammer flakes. Hence why I'm abrading quite aggressively. I'm going to attack them from this edge first. So instead of undercutting this time, it's all about hitting the edge and making sure that that abraded edge is tough and has a bit of bite to it, but isn't overly blunt. Otherwise there's nothing for the antler to bite onto. So there's some of that ridge. Still got a bit more on the back here. A little steep running through there. I wonder if I can set up a platform. But these will be some of the last removals I do for this stage before I get into the finer removals. What I'm doing is I'm bringing the platform in, I'm tilting it inwards towards this area that I want to remove, because that really is going to direct the shock. It's now a very tough platform, about as steep as I can make it within reason. I'm going to catch it on the edge quite hard and see if I can just drive it round the corner. There we go, a bit like that. And I utilised, by slightly tilting that platform inwards, I utilised partly that ridge to try and remove that hinge, because although it's a problem, I've now used it against itself to help me remove it. Always a satisfying one to get. still got that something, might be a big fault in there. Really, to get beyond a rough out stage into refinement, you really want to have eliminated any possible problems like that. As I said earlier, you really don't want to leave them as a possibility to break, because if this was to be a spearhead, for example, that would be a major weakness. So I'm putting these flakes in, again, that if it is going to go, it's going to go now. But it's holding on, almost an arrowhead blank there. I'm going to try and put some flakes in across here. When you're braiding like this and taking off small flakes as I am, you've still got to be aware not to make this angle over 90 degrees. That basic principle remains. An antler is not going to bite into a 90-degree angle very easily. So hopefully with this one, this might curve around the back here, if the flint is feeling favourable. Got some of it. I think narrowing this down would be my next action. I'm becoming less and less concerned about this platform because for the amount of force that's gone through it with a hard hammer and antler hammer, it should have gone by now. It really should have. But knowing flint, it will probably go later down the line. Try and get a flake just above the fault just to see if I can expose where it comes out. Might just be a very big axe at this rate. Platform right next to the fault. Let's go right through. If it's going to go, it's surely got to go now. And it still hasn't. And there is, I wonder if that's on the same plane. It's not. There was just a little fault that started to appear on this side, but it's actually on a different axis. So I think I'll take maybe one more flake off. I feel like I've said that before. For this stage, because next time I'll explore mostly soft hammer work and setting up the platform specifically for antler. But I've gone over it a little bit, but Next time it will certainly be a bit more. I seem to have ended up making an axe head, but I put the disclaimer out that I've been sometimes cautious, sometimes less cautious about exploring that fault, just to see what it's up to. And it hasn't done anything yet. So I think I'm going to leave this here for now. Still got that little remains of that floor running through there. But next time I will go more into platform prep for an antler hammer as we go through that later process. But I guess to summarise and try and draw back into quite literally some of what I've been doing, I have my handy whiteboard as usual. So for my block of flint, which was a sort of odd shape, for some of my edges that I've tried to get through to be quite invasive flakes, I can't strike straight onto these edges and get them because they're clearly only going to curve so far. But that's perhaps not my first action, is to go for a big flake. It is indeed to create one of these small flakes, so that as I attack it on the reverse, I can then get a longer flake. Or certainly for one of these knobbly bits which sort of sticks out, if I was to take a flake from here and remove it like so, as I flip it over with one of those strikes that comes straight onto the edge, that's a slightly long curving arrow, try it again. It was a bit weird working reverse. And my flake would be one of those nice long invasive curving flakes with the little jiggle at the end there that I have next to my feet. And again, as the follow-up, with this tilting angle, so on and so forth. And that's where my biface would come from. And in terms of tilting those angles, my limit would be that again, that 90-degree angle. So if we go back to where I was, remove those arrows. If I was in the situation where this continued again, and I wanted to remove this edge, if I put in quite a heavy hit and removed a lot of this material, and say this flake came off like so, make sure this is really clear so you can see it, this angle here is now over 90 degrees. So I've tilted the angle, but it's been tilted too much. Really, that should be, in fact, a little shallower. So that lighter flake would have been better. So instead of something as steep as this, by striking it slightly further back and at a slightly different angle, I would have had an edge that looked more like this, and that would have given me that edge that was now under 90 degrees in this angle here. And that's a far more viable angle for me to take off one of those big flakes. So just remember that as you're tilting those angles for those two-stage approach of taking the angle setup flake for your platform and then going for the big hit. It is always that under 90-degree angle. And for those flakes that you're taking off in the preparation, just do keep an eye on them. Any of those heavy ridges need to be removed. So if your edge that you have looks a bit like this, remove this, and you're hoping to strike anywhere along here, let's say you're setting up your flakes, you've taken off the angling flake, that first punch, that first stage. If you've then aggressively abraded it, either for the antler hammer to bite the edge or with a hard hammer, you've taken lots of little flakes off that have hinge fractures and all sorts of ridges going across them. This is not a very clean edged strike, and you've now been fully exposed to my drawing skills and the limits of. This is not a clean angle, but a strike from the reverse, either from straight on or any one of the angles, we'll take off a big flake, maybe even a single flake, to provide a flake scar ridge, which might be further back and higher up, but importantly it's cleaned off this edge here. And if you just want to strike here, here or here, it's now much cleaner. You don't have to hit through ridges or any crushed areas. So that's really it, is just keeping an eye on what those flake scars look like and making sure that they are clean of those ridges or any crushed areas, making sure the platform is nicely supported, you're hitting straight down on it, and utilising the flint as much as possible. You saw me using those corner knobbly bits and not just hitting them off because they're in the way or the flint's heavy. I used them as opportunities to create that first tilted angle, that first punch, flipped it over, made sure it was clean, and then went for the big hit and the follow-up at the 2 to 3 centimetre depth for those first big flakes. And as I progressed, instead of a depth of 2 to 3 centimetres, to undercut with a big hammerstone that then dropped to maybe 1 to 2 centimetres, and then towards the end with the antler hammer I was then making contact on the edge. And remember, if you've got any problems like hinge fractures of any kind, you can undercut them with a hammerstone if there's a platform and an angle that allows it. And for any of those concavities, which I went over partly in the last video, but certainly in this video as well, you can undo them by dropping the extreme end of those concavities by just removing those flakes to bring that curve back in, and then it's a viable shot. So that's part one with this blank. I guess you'll just have to tune in next time to see if the flint breaks. Bye for now. We take great pride in the videos produced for the Ancient Craft channel. We would really love to continue making more videos with new tutorials, site visits, artifact showcases, and of course, nap time. We have a Patreon account where you can support us in our efforts. There are competitions and replica artifact giveaways. Check it out here. And thank you to those who have already signed up. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.